Dogman, Sasquatch, Tunnel, Battle. Dear Scary Stories NYC, my grandson told me that he saw a dogman, and I'll tell you what he told me. Hearing his story jogged a memory of my own from many years back when I saw a dogman Sasquatch battle in an old abandoned railroad tunnel in Pennsylvania. Obviously, I'll tell you all about that, too. My grandson, who we can call Chester, lives in one of the nicer neighborhoods in Pittsburgh. He decided to look up some of our ancestors who are buried within the city limits, and he was surprised to find one ancestor buried in a Catholic cemetery in Hazelwood, which is a neighborhood in Pittsburgh. We had thought we were all Protestant, but apparently our family is a mix of various cultures. So Chester and his partner were walking into the cemetery, and it didn't look as old as he was expecting it to look. So the two of them were looking out at the sea of tombstones before beginning to walk out into them, and they both thought they heard the sound of an animal in distress in the woods to their left. Chester said that both of them were instantly scared as they didn't know what those sounds meant. It was at the very least an unhappy animal. Was it injured? Should they search it out to provide first aid or get it to a vet? On the other hand, was this an aggressive or even a diseased animal? What if it had rabies? Neither of them really knew what to do, but the animal had certainly distracted them from their initial reason to visit the cemetery. Then the creature revealed itself, or at least a creature did so. It looked just exactly like a werewolf from a movie called Dog Soldiers. That's what my grandson told me. I have since watched the movie, and it's not that far different from the kind of werewolf that I saw years earlier, which I'll tell you about in a minute. So this creature covered in dark fur walked out of the woods on his hind legs and stood there with this intense eye shine going on, like when a cat is completely freaked out. So my grandson was thinking this creature was freaking out. Either it was distressed because he was there, or else maybe it ate weird mushrooms or had mental problems because its pupils were way more dilated than it could have possibly needed them to be in the afternoon light. When he told me this, it triggered my own memories, which I will share with you shortly. I peppered Chester with questions. What were its legs shaped like? Like a dog's legs. Did it have paws or hands or claws? Yes. What kind of a canine head did this dogman have? It looked like a wolf with the body of a steroid freak human. Huh. I asked Chester what happened next, and he said that he and his partner beat it out of there the same way they had come in. I can't say that I could blame them. I would have done the same thing when I had my sighting experience if I hadn't been so incredibly overwhelmingly tired when it happened. I had not heard of the modern dogman. I had seen one, or at least something very much like it, when I was in my early 20s, but then I never heard about the species again until my grandson came to me with this story just a few weeks back in January. He also turned me on to your channel and a few other ones as well. I have to say, it's been a revelation that this thing I saw seems to be getting as famous as Bigfoot. I've hardly ever told anyone about my cryptid battle sighting, but that might change. For now at least, I want to remain anonymous to see if there's any reaction to this story, or how my family reacts. I might get back to you with another version at some point that has even more details, but for now, this slightly vague and anonymous way of telling the story is going to have to do. When I ran away from home in the 1970s, I had to do some awful things and deal with some terrible people just in order to survive long enough to tell you about it. I dealt with some pretty hard criminals, and I suffered under some kinds of scary law enforcement professionals. I got kicked down, and I got kicked around. Most of it damaged me permanently, leaving scars you can probably see from outer space, and the rest of it helped me to grow up. But when I think back on those crazy Wild West days of my young adulthood, the memory that pops up the most and jumps to the front of the line is my memory of the time I saw a dogman and a Bigfoot Sasquatch battling over who was going to get to bed down in this old abandoned tunnel in the woods in Pennsylvania. My parents weren't so bad now that I look back on it, but they were not hippies and I was, so I felt as though they were overly harsh and controlling. In retrospect, they were pretty mellow with me, considering I was going against nearly everything they believed in. I even resented being well-fed, well-clothed, and sent to the right schools. I wanted to be a man of the people, and so I soon found myself poor. While I had worn dirty jeans to show solidarity with the proletariat before, I found myself living on the road, not owning anything other than the clothes I was wearing at the time. My parents didn't exactly cut me off. They just had no way of reaching me in those days. It wasn't like we had cell phones, and it wasn't like I was sending them my forwarding address. I was sleeping in the woods. I was sleeping in doorways. My family lived in a nice suburb of Pittsburgh, and I found my runaway self wandering to the east of that. I had heard that if you follow this one old abandoned rail line, you'll come across old tunnels periodically that you can sleep in or get out of the rain as need be. There were no actual train tracks as the project had been abandoned, and sometimes I would lose my way in the areas which were more overgrown. Also, there's at least one tunnel that a river now flows through, so obviously I couldn't sleep there. Looking back on it, I find it remarkable that I could go from being so spoiled to living as a wandering hobo, but never underestimate the power of a young man who wants to rebel against his parents. It's like if Einstein had a kid, he'd probably have turned out to be anti-intellectual just for the sake of being rebellious. There must be a reason rebelliousness is programmed into humans, and therefore it must be a good thing if you're able to step back far enough to get the correct perspective. Maybe it's nature's way of forcing our species to re-examine old values every few generations. Maybe when leaders try to stamp down and silence dissent, they're trying to battle nature itself. I found myself wandering in the neighborhood of the old abandoned Pennsylvania Turnpike in or near Harrisonville, Pennsylvania, and that's where the main part of my story took place. There are all sorts of weird things in those woods, believe me. They even have these abandoned buildings that I found out were a POW camp for Germans in the USA after World War II. I wonder what kinds of guys they imported from Germany after the war to imprison in the woods of Pennsylvania. What kinds of things do you think they caught those dudes doing that they brought them all the way over here and held them in prison when the war had already been over? I mean, I never heard of anything like that happening before, but it's a part of the official history, so apparently it did. They must have done something for the U.S. government to go all Justin Trudeau on their butts in such a savage, scorched earth kind of way. My mind flashes to the fact that the Germans had certain operatives they called werewolves. I saw a literal werewolf not far from that former POW camp, and it just seems so odd a coincidence. But I do think that's what it was, a coincidence. I don't think either of the cryptids I witnessed battling were war criminals, and I don't think they came from any place but the backwoods of Pennsylvania. Our state has great cities like Philadelphia, and many institutions we have a right to be proud of. But we also have a lot of deep, dark woods which hold even deeper and darker secrets. And so it was that one night I got a bit lost and wandered hungry in the woods for longer than I normally would. It started to rain because of course it did, and I got much more intense in my search for some kind of cover. When I found one of these abandoned railroad tunnels to sleep in, I headed for it, nearly incoherent and needing some sleep first and food second. By the way, I should mention, someone should buy the rights to my story and shoot it as a movie, because the locations over there are really spooky to look at. Like, even if there were no cryptids in those woods, I think the human mind would invent monsters or ghosts, because there are so many really spooky looking locations. And the tunnels built for the abandoned railway over there in those woods are really beautiful. The workmanship is worthy of a king's castle, but these are just tunnels meant for a train to pass under for 5 or 10 seconds. The blocks are placed together so well that no mortar is even used. I only recently read that these tunnels were built by Sicilian stonemasons, flown in by Andrew Carnegie himself. So while I was spending the night sleeping in mud inside old unused tunnels, I was also spending those evenings in structures paid for by one of the richest men in the world in his day, built by literally the finest stonemasons known to the world of that era. There's something peculiarly American about starving to death in a structure built by the world's greatest artisans for the world's richest man. And so on that rainy night, did I mention it was raining? I found one of those remarkable tunnels built in a modern version of the Neolithic style, using no cement at all, and into this beautiful little castle I staggered, looking for a dry place to lie down and become unconscious. But instead of wandering into a quiet, abandoned interior space, it was like I walked into the boxing ring at Madison Square Garden. There were these two really big guys in the darkness having a fist fight. Under ordinary circumstances, I might have backed out immediately, but I was so completely tired and weak that I slid sideways into the wall and hunkered down, hiding, I hoped, in the shadows. I slid down the wall into a seated position and literally passed out for what might have been a few seconds and might have been a few minutes. I felt as though I immediately woke up, but I was disoriented at first, so I might have slept for some while. It took me a moment to understand that I was in a tunnel and that two big bums were still having their fight over toward the center of this tunnel. That was probably the warmer and drier part of the shelter, so I figured that was why they were fighting. As long as they kept occupied with each other and not me, I honestly didn't mind. Having regrouped a bit from resting, I finally woke up enough to look over at the fighting bums. When I did, my mind did a somersault and I wondered if I were either dreaming or delirious. Those were not bums. They weren't even human beings. They were monsters. I had to keep blinking because my eyes kept tearing up from shock or surprise. I was genuinely worried that I had lost my mind because it was two big, hairy monster men, like from a Hollywood movie, fighting, but in real life. There was a big brown Bigfoot, just like on TV and in documentaries, and it was trying to wipe out this other tall, muscular humanoid animal that had a head more like a dog, really. But not a normal dog. It wasn't a cute face. Imagine a dog from caveman times that somehow evolved to walk upright, like we do, on his hind legs, not on all fours. It was snaggle-toothed. It had multiple injuries from a lifetime of battling. It was like a cross between a dog and a Bigfoot, you might say, although I certainly don't mean that literally. The legs it walked on were more like the hind legs of a wolf, whereas Bigfoot's legs and feet are similar to thicker versions of human legs and feet, with the bend of the foot in a different place due to the change in center of gravity from our species to theirs. I got that last part from Jeff Meldrum about the center of gravity and all that, but I saw the thicker legs and the bigger feet with my own eyes in person in that tunnel during that rainstorm. I can't honestly tell you which tunnel this took place in, although I have sent you my best guess. Some of them are only 15 feet high, so those can be ruled out, as I think the two battling behemoths would have been banging their heads against the ceiling if it were only that tall. The two hairy monsters had very different means of attack. The Bigfoot seemed to be squaring himself and attempting big, powerful, muscled punches and blows to his enemy, while the slightly smaller but far quicker canine nipped and scratched away, tearing at his opponent with much smaller attacks that nearly never ended. While the ape-like Sasquatch sounded more emotional and human, the wolfman's emotions seemed directed entirely toward attack. I was so tired that, in spite of all the danger, I just sat myself in the shadows barely inside the structure, and I closed my eyes, and I listened to them battling. I needed the rest. I was becoming incoherent with exhaustion and hunger. I had no choice but to stay there like a fly on the wall, keeping myself as small as I could, and as out of the way as possible. I admit, I only opened my eyes when they made the louder sounds, or when they sounded like they were getting closer. You learn to sleep with one eye open, as the saying goes. You learn to sleep and be ready to run at the same time. Then, something happened which caused both of the creatures to scream out in a blood-curdling manner, sounding far more upset than at any earlier point in the fight. By the time I opened my eyes, I saw fur flying every place as both giant animals were tearing into each other, using teeth and nails and muscle. They weren't just fighting over a place to sleep any longer. This had become a battle to the death, and from the looks of things, it wasn't gonna be the Dogman's death. Apparently sensing the same thing, I saw the Sasquatch fling himself away from the fighting, landing in such a position as to race away on all fours, heading down the tunnel in the direction away from me. If you've never seen a Sasquatch running on all fours, you got something to add to your bucket list. It was as impressive as it was surprising. The creature seemed as bipedal as you or me, but down on all fours, he could run like a cheetah. So could the Dogman for that matter, and I got to see that as well. The two hairy monsters raced out of the tunnel in the opposite direction, and I moved over to a spot with less wind in it, then went back to sleep. I've never seen another cryptid in all my life, I'm somewhat surprised to say. Since I was quite a young man when this battle of the Goliaths took place, I figured I'd lived long enough to see where science would officially accept the reality of things like this. I thought we'd be in communication with the aliens, like on the Star Trek TV show as well. Unless those aliens are all really backward bad guys, the leaders of this Earth are clearly not in touch with them. The future that Captain Kirk promised us has been preempted by a return to kings throwing their own citizens in dungeons. That's not the future I wanted for my grandchildren. It's just feudal times plus cell phones. As scary as my days on the road were, I don't regret a single moment of any of it. I got to experience true and real freedom, warts and all. I got to live as an American for a while, and nobody can ever take that away from me. Well, not till they start reprogramming our memories, but hopefully I'll be dead and gone before memory alteration gets mandated too. Since I gave up and became part of the system my parents wanted me to be part of, I do try to maintain certain honest things in my otherwise sold-out life. I donate heavily to causes that help the homeless, and I cover the bills for a homeless shelter in my hometown. My special concern is with runaways, because that's what I once was, back in the days when I witnessed the Dogman, Sasquatch, tunnel battle. Our executive producer today is Paul Essery. He got more cogs than cognitive processory. He got more credits than American Expressory, because he's a badass. That Mr. Paul Essery. Please join us in thanking today's executive producer, Paul Essery, who receives all our perks, including our weekly secret uncensored Dogman stories, far too wild to ever run on this channel. Now here's international TV spokesmongrel Henry Lee Dogman to fill in the rest of the deets. Hank? Thanks for watching till the end. If you liked what you saw, please consider clicking like on the video or sharing it with your friends and family that you think might also be interested. If you would like to see more of our work, please consider subscribing and hitting that bell icon next to the subscribe button so that YouTube will alert you when we put out a new video. To become a channel member and gain access to our special perks, you can click that join link under each of our videos. Another option is to join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. You can join for as little as 99 cents on YouTube or $1.50 at peterbernard.com, and that gains you access to our weekly secret uncensored episodes. If you'd like to see our 21 hours of archives of uncensored Dogman stories, then please join at the $3 level or above. To get to watch our shows in advance of the public, please join at our $10 level. That gets you all the perks. If you join our channel memberships, you need to check our community page here on YouTube in order to get the links to the secret videos and other perks. If you're in the PayPal Subscribers Club, Peter will email you all the news and links himself. Once joining the PayPal Club, which is Peter's homemade club, please give him a chance to see that you've joined and to compose you a personal welcome email, as none of that is automated. But whichever you join, we'll name you an executive producer for the next available episode. Do you have a scary experience that you'd like to share with us? You can email us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or call our Scary Stories voicemail hotline at 804-LA-SCARY. That's 804-537-2279. It's a Google voicemail box, so that means it keeps cutting off after every 3 minutes. If your story is longer than that, please keep calling back and we can piece it together on our end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.